They were born into power, raised in the eye of the political storm, and thrust onto the national stage as their father climbed to the highest seat in the land. Tricia and Julie Nixon weren't just presidential daughters, they were American royalty, gracing the covers of magazines, attending state dinners, and marrying into two of the most powerful political families in the country. Their lives looked like something out of a Cold War fairy tale, elegant, poised, perfect. But behind the polished smiles was a family walking a tightrope over scandal, secrecy, and the relentless pressure of public scrutiny. And then it all unraveled. Watergate wasn't just the downfall of a presidency, it was the implosion of a family's carefully crafted image. As the cameras rolled and the headlines screamed betrayal, cover-ups, and disgrace, the Nixon daughters stood by their father's side. But once he resigned and the world turned its attention elsewhere, Tricia and Julie vanished from view. No interviews, no tell-alls, no reality show reinvention, just silence. So what really happened when the spotlight went dark? Did they retreat into quiet lives? Or did they rewrite their own legacy, far away from the Oval Office and the ghosts of scandal? This is the untold story of Tricia and Julie Nixon, the daughters who witnessed history from the inside and then disappeared into it. Let's start with Tricia Nixon Cox. Born on February 21, 1946 in Whittier, California, Tricia was the eldest of the Nixon children. Always seen as the more composed and reserved of the two sisters, she carried herself with quiet confidence. But make no mistake, Tricia's soft demeanor masked a strong intellect and quiet defiance. Her education was top tier. She attended Horace Mann, Sidwell Friends, and Chapin, and ultimately graduated from Boston College in 1968 with a degree in English. The same year, her father won the presidency. Here's a moment straight from the pages of old society columns. In 1964, Tricia made her debut at the prestigious International Debutante Ball in New York. Her escort, Edward Cox, a polished, well-connected Princeton law student. The two hit it off and stayed together through their college years. By 1971, their romance culminated in one of the most iconic weddings in American political history. Not in a cathedral or a grand ballroom, but in the White House Rose Garden. It was the first outdoor wedding ever held for a presidential daughter, and it stopped the nation in its tracks. Cameras flashed, papers gushed over her gown, her bouquet, the elegance of the day. For a brief moment, the country was enchanted. But once the last photograph was taken and the last article printed, Tricia did something unexpected. She retreated from the spotlight almost entirely. Together, Tricia and Ed Cox welcomed their only child, Christopher Nixon Cox, in 1979. Christopher would follow in the family's legacy of ambition, earning his law degree, becoming an attorney, and even stepping briefly into the political arena by running for a congressional seat in New York. While Christopher carried the Nixon name into the new century, his mother remained quietly in the background, never craving the spotlight the way some political families do. Unlike her sister Julie, who was more publicly vocal, Tricia opted for a life of near anonymity. She settled into the rhythms of suburban life in New York, far from the frenzy of Washington and the constant scrutiny of her father's name. But don't mistake her low profile for a complete disappearance. Behind the scenes, Tricia stayed active. She served on the boards of several medical and charitable organizations and maintained a steady, if quiet, presence in the Richard Nixon Foundation, helping to protect and redefine the image of her father in the wake of scandal. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was engaged, deliberate, and aware of how history might remember them. Still, every now and then, the reserved Nixon daughter made headlines, not for scandal, but for the unexpected. Like in 1968 when she went on a date with none other than George W. Bush, yes, the future president of the United States. Let's just say it didn't spark a love story. According to reports, Bush spilled wine and tried to sneak a cigarette, which didn't exactly impress Tricia. She allegedly ended the night early, asking to be brought back to the White House before dessert. Or in 1970 when Britain's Prince Charles visited the United States. Whispers swirled that Tricia and the young royal were being gently nudged together by matchmakers on both sides of the Atlantic. Charles himself would later laugh about it, calling it one of those moments when people were trying to marry him off to Tricia Nixon. Royal gossip or not, the moment added another layer of intrigue to a woman who had become, by choice, something of an enigma. Now let's talk about Julie Nixon Eisenhower, the younger Nixon daughter who in many ways was the more visible, more vocal counterpart to Tricia. Born on July 5, 1948 in Washington, D.C., Julie was known for her intelligence, composure, and a confidence that set her apart. While Tricia often stayed in the background, background, Julie stepped forward. She was thoughtful, articulate, the kind of woman who could smile diplomatically for the cameras and then challenge you in a sharp debate behind closed doors. Her upbringing was shaped by a whirlwind of duty and prestige. Raised between the sun-soaked suburbs of California and the political gravity of D.C., Julie attended elite schools like Sidwell Friends and Chapin in Manhattan. Eventually, she landed at Smith College, where she graduated in 1970, right in the thick of her father's presidency. But she didn't stop there. Just a year later, she earned a master's degree in elementary education from Catholic University, continuing her quiet but determined pursuit of excellence. And then came the plot twist worthy of a political soap opera. While still in college, Julie fell for David Eisenhower. Yes, that Eisenhower, the grandson of former President Dwight D. Eisenhower. It was the ultimate power match, a literal union of two American political dynasties. They tied the knot on December 22, 1968, in a ceremony dripping with formality and symbolism, the kind of event that felt more like a diplomatic summit than a wedding. Officiating the union, Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, the legendary preacher best known for championing the philosophy of positive thinking. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a merging of legacies. Julie and David would go on to have 3 children: Jenny, who later stepped into the spotlight as an actress, Alexander, and Melanie, a family born at the intersection of 2 presidencies. But the public life they inherited wasn't always so glamorous. But Julie Nixon Eisenhower wasn't content to simply smile for photo ops or play the traditional role of political daughter and presidential wife. From the moment her father stepped into office, she hit the ground running, crisscrossing the country to advocate for issues close to her heart: children's welfare, elderly care, and environmental protection. Julie wanted to make a difference, and she wasn't afraid to use her platform to do it. Between 1973 and 1975, she stepped into a serious professional role as assistant managing editor of the Saturday Evening Post. This wasn't just a vanity title. Julie helped launch an entire book division and contributed her own writing to its catalog. She had a voice, and she knew how to use it. Among her most notable works, Pat Nixon, The Untold Story, 1986, an intimate portrait of her often overlooked mother; Special People, 1977, a collection of profiles about everyday heroes who inspired her; and Julie Eisenhower's Cookbook for Children, 1975, where she somehow made recipes and reading fun for kids at the same time. Years later, she co-authored Going Home to Glory with her husband David, a moving memoir about President Eisenhower's final years. But for Julie, writing wasn't just about publishing, it was about legacy. When the Watergate scandal erupted and the press turned on Richard Nixon, Julie refused to back down. While others distanced themselves, she leaned in. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, delivered speeches. She debated journalists and historians. She challenged the narrative, refusing to let her father be reduced to a cautionary tale. She believed he was more than his lowest moment, and she was determined to show the world the full picture. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Julie became a vital force within the Richard Nixon Foundation, not as a ceremonial figure, but as a driving force, shaping museum exhibits, securing scholarships, and championing charitable programs. Her relentless efforts earned her national recognition. Good Housekeeping named her one of the 10 most admired women in America, more than once. Julie was a fighter, not just for her family's reputation, but for a deeper, more complicated truth, and she never stopped. Julie and Tricia Nixon may no longer dominate the headlines, but that doesn't mean their stories have faded. In fact, their lives offer something far more enduring than fame, a testament to quiet resilience, unwavering loyalty, and the ability to find dignity even in the shadow of public humiliation. They didn't choose to be born into the storm of American politics. They didn't ask to have their adolescence televised, their weddings turned into national events, or their family name dragged through the mud in one of the most devastating political scandals in history. But they endured it all, and they endured it with remarkable grace. While the world watched their father fall from the highest office in the land, Julie and Tricia did something that the cameras didn't capture. They stood by him. Not blindly, not naively, but with a deep sense of familial duty and personal conviction. They didn't run to the tabloids or cash in on tell-all memoirs. Instead, they carved out lives on their own terms. Lives defined not by scandal, but by service, scholarship, and quiet strength. Julie took up the role of historian and advocate, not only for her father, but for a more nuanced understanding of political legacy. She faced down critics and rewrote narratives. Tricia, though more reserved, never disengaged. She worked behind the scenes, supported causes she believed in, and remained a protective guardian of her family's memory. And through it all, both sisters maintained a sense of humor, perspective, and yes, even hope. They've lived through the kind of public scrutiny that would break many people. And yet, here they are, still standing, still graceful, still carrying forward a name that history tried to define for them, but never fully could. In the end, Tricia and Julie Nixon didn't ask for the roles they were given. Daughters of a president, symbols of a nation's highest hopes and darkest failures. But what they did with those roles is quietly extraordinary. They didn't crumble under the weight of scandal. They didn't chase fame or rewrite history to serve themselves. Instead, they carried on with dignity, with strength, and with a deep, unshakable loyalty to their family. They remind us that legacy isn't just shaped by the fall, it's shaped by how you rise after it. And sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones told not in front of cameras, but in the quiet choices made when no one is watching. So now, we turn to you. What do we remember, and what do we choose to forget about the families behind the power? Should the children of scandal be forever tied to their parents' sins, or do they deserve a narrative of their own? If this story made you think differently about history, legacy, or what it means to carry a name, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories behind the headlines, because sometimes the people we forget are the ones we should remember most.